The auctioneer dropped the gavel at $40, and the loudest man on the lot laughed at him in front of the whole crowd. Silas Wren did not laugh back. He just lowered his hand, the bid already his, and looked up at what he had bought. A great dead cabinet standing off by itself against the barn wall at the edge of the lot, a towering Victorian secretary desk of dark walnut. Near 6 feet tall and built like a bank vault, its 2 great hinged wings folded shut across the front like doors sealed on something, the wood gone gray with dust, and 1 wing sprung off true. The drawers swollen and the writing bed jammed, so far gone and so plainly broken that the crowd read it as nothing but a bulky cabinet nobody could use. A thing the estate had shoved to the far wall the day the old house was cleared, that 100 bidders had walked past as too big to move and too broken to bother with, and that Silas had just paid $40 to own, jammed wings and warped writing bed and all. It was a bright, clear Saturday morning, the kind of hard light that comes off a gravel farmyard at the end of summer. At a farm and estate auction held in the yard and open barn of a foreclosed homestead on the edge of a small county town. Silas was 73 years old, lean and a little stooped now, but sure in the hands, with a deeply lined face gone soft and weathered, close-cropped, white hair under a flat cap, wire spectacles pushed up his nose, and pale, patient eyes that took their time. His hands were broad and scarred and marked at the knuckles, with a lifetime of chisel nicks and old glue and fine cabinet work, the hands of a man who had spent his life joining wood and freeing the secret hardware of it. He had worked that trade his whole life, a cabinetmaker and a restorer of old case furniture, the one the estate men and the antique dealers sent for when a piece had a jammed lock or a warped door or a mechanism nobody living knew how to work, until the shops all went to particle board and stapled drawers, and the old men who could read a piece of furniture by its joinery were quietly closed out. The man who laughed was Dorset Vane, who ran the biggest second-hand-and-salvage barn in 3 counties, a heavy-set man of about 55 in a loud plum-colored blazer he wore to be seen in, his face clean-shaven and ruddy, a thick gold ring on one hand and a stub of a cigar in the other. $40, Dorset said, loud, so the whole lot could hear it. $40 for a broke-down cabinet that don't even open, furniture man. The wings are jammed, the drawers are swelled shut, the writing shelf's warped clean off its slides, and the back stove in so the whole carcass is racked out of square. Nobody's opened one of these monsters in 50 years, and nobody's going to. You can't use it, you can't sell it, and you can't hardly move it without 4 men and a ramp. You didn't buy a desk, old-timer. You bought a walnut coffin the size of a wardrobe, and you paid $40 to haul it home when the wrecking crew would have broke it up for firewood for nothing. He coined the name right there, loud enough to carry, the old man's broke-down coffin. And it stuck for the rest of that month. The crowd laughed because Dorset laughed, the way a crowd does. Silas stood through it without a change in his face, his hands folded quiet in front of him, and let the laughter pass, the way weather passes a man who has decided to stand in it. Now, if you have ever watched a quiet, capable man get talked over by a loud one, if you have ever known somebody whose skill the world used when it needed something and forgot the rest of the time, then you already understand what this channel is about, and you might take a second to subscribe, because the people who stay for stories like Silas's are exactly who Iron Hook Stories was built for. Silas said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that work does not answer to noise. What Dorset Vane could not have known, grinning behind his cigar, was that Silas had stood in front of that dead cabinet with 50 years of the trade awake in him. The crowd saw a broken hulk against a barn wall. Silas saw the desk, under the gray dust, the way the walnut had been chosen for its burl and figure. The dovetails cut fine and closed by one careful hand. The great wing hinges forged heavier than any furniture ever needed, and a depth to the carcass that did not match the shelves he could see through the sprung wing. The proportions were wrong for what they were all saying. He knew what a factory case looked like, screwed up by the dozen, and what a real cabinet maker's looked like, cut and fitted and finished by one patient shop. This was a maker's. Above all, he knew that a proud old cabinet maker who built a piece like this almost always hid its truth where the world would never think to look. Behind a false back cut to look solid, under a writing bed that lifts, in a compartment sprung by a catch no stranger would ever find. Silas knew the difference between a broken cabinet and a great desk somebody had let die, and what he found that night would cut a forgotten maker's name and the people whose letters that desk had kept back into a record that had let them all go. Silas had come up hard. He went to the cabinet shop young, apprenticed to an old joiner, learning the grain and the glue and the long patient feel of a mechanism until a jammed drawer ran sweet and a hidden catch gave under the thumb and made himself into the kind of hand an estate or a dealer called by name when a piece would not open. His wife Adeline had died after a long illness, and they had buried no family of their own, and after she was gone, he lived alone in a small house behind his old shop with his rows of chisels and his quiet. The town had a use for his hands and no use at all for his memory. He knew that. He bid on the desk anyway. He bid because he knew it. A man who had freed the secret hardware of 1,000 old cabinets could no more walk past a great desk going for firewood than walk past his own past. The crowd had seen a broke-down coffin. Silas had seen the piece as it was, and had seen that somebody built it to hide the thing that mattered most. If you've made it this far into Silas Wren's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He let them sell the rest of the estate first, the old kitchen dressers and iron beds and box tools knocked down to the dealers, while Silas waited by the barn wall beside the towering dead desk. When the auctioneer finally came to the great folded secretary and called for a bid, Dorset glanced up at it, called out his joke, and not one other hand went up. Silas raised one finger, and the gavel came down at 40. He paid cash, signed the slip, and arranged to bring 3 men and a low trailer around at the end of the day, because a 6-foot walnut cabinet desk was an awkward, heavy thing to move whole, and the rules gave him until dark to haul off what he had bought. The story got around the town before Silas's trailer was off the county road. By Monday, people who had not spoken 20 words to him in years stopped him outside the feed store to ask, grinning, whether he was going to pry his coffin open and bury himself in it to get his $40 back. Ned Marsh, who ran the hardware counter, said it plainer, that there was nothing to a stove in old cabinet but swelled wood and a wrecking bar. Silas was buying a small can of light oil, a set of fine picks, a soft brush, and a box of clean rag, and did not look up. "We'll see," he said, and that was the whole of his answer. He had spent 50 years learning that a desk is either a maker's or it isn't, and the noise a crowd makes has nothing to do with which. But Silas did not open the desk up in the daylight, with the dealer's trucks still on the lot and Dorset holding court by the auction table. He waited until the place had emptied out, and he had the great cabinet home, wrestled down off the trailer, and stood square against the wall of his shop under a single work lamp, and went at it alone that night, after the town had gone quiet and the windows up the street had gone dark. He did not tear into it. He knew that a desk like this keeps its truth deep behind the wood, behind a false back, under a bed that lifts, in a compartment closed by a catch, and that you reach those places slowly, the way you reach into anything a careful hand once closed up. He worked oil into the swollen wing hinges and eased them until the two great doors swung open at last, and the desk unfolded before him like a thing opening its arms. Rows of little drawers and pigeonholes and a broad writing bed laid bare in the lamplight. And when he ran his hand into the back of the writing well, he stopped, because the well did not go back as far as the carcass did. And the panel that closed it was not the raw sawn board a maker leaves where no eye falls, but a fitted, finished panel set in with a care that made no sense, unless it was hiding what lay behind it. Down at the diner they were still asking if he had chopped up his coffin for kindling yet. Silas set his fingertips along the seam of that false back and began, gently, to feel for the catch that a proud maker sets where the world would never look. The desk had its own long, hard history, and the town had let it go for firewood with never once asking after it. It ran back to the man who built it, a self-taught 19th century American cabinetmaker of no fame in his own time, who had learned the casemaker's trade alone in a river-town shop, and set out to build the finest cabinet secretaries he was capable of in an age when the great Eastern houses already had the rich cities sewn up. And it ran back to the one desk that maker built to order for a named man of consequence, a bank president 2 states east, Coleman Ash, who had commissioned this towering wingfold secretary for the office he meant to keep his whole life, a full patent cabinet office desk the maker cut and joined far beyond any ordinary commission, because he meant, once, to build the best thing he was capable of. But Coleman Ash died before the desk ever shipped, died with the piece finished and standing in the maker's shop, paid for and never delivered, and with a last will and a bundle of letters he had trusted into the maker's keeping for safe carriage still sealed inside its false back. The desk passed by default into the estate that foreclosed the commission, drifted from sale to sale as an oversized cabinet nobody could place, and ended shoved against a barn wall 2 states from where it was made, its wings jammed and its secret unopened, until no one alive remembered that a great maker had built it for a man who never lived to sit at it. The maker himself died poor and unknown, his name on no famous desk, his finest work sealed up around a dead man's last words. What none of them ever asked was what becomes of the letters a dying man trusts to a desk when both the man and the maker are forgotten. The answer had been standing against the barn wall the whole time, sealed behind a false panel in a $40 desk nobody wanted. Silas found the catch a little after midnight, a slip of wood no wider than a matchstick, set flush in the grain along the base of the writing well that a stranger would have brushed 1,000 times and never felt. He pressed it, and something behind the false back gave with a soft, dry knock 50 years in the waiting, and the fitted panel dropped a half-inch on a hidden pin and swung free in his hand. Behind it was a shallow, dust-dry cavity built into the depth of the carcass, and in it, stacked and tied and waiting, lay a thick bundle of letters gone amber with age, bound in faded ribbon, and beneath them a single folded document under a cracked wax seal. Silas lifted them out under the lamp, breathing shallow, and when he had the top letter open and read the hand, he set it down and stood very still. These were not a stranger's stray papers. They were a man's kept correspondence, and under the seal his last will and testament, the will of one Coleman Ash, a bank president 2 states east. Drawn and witnessed and sealed a lifetime ago and never proved. Trusted into this desk for safe carriage and lost with the man who wrote it. But the letters were only half of it. Silas went deeper now, drawing the small lamp in close along the burl of the left wing, reading the figured walnut with a light raked across it, and there, worked into the burl itself where only a maker's eye would ever catch it, was a maker's mark, a small brass decal and a stamped plate let flush into the wood under the finish, the cabinet maker's own name in his river town, and beneath it the model the trade had only ever half believed was real, a patent cabinet office secretary of the finest wing-fold pattern, one of the few the man ever built. And low inside the knee-hole, struck into the frame by the maker's own die a lifetime ago and never meant for any eye but another maker's, was the same name again, a date, the order number, and cut beside it the name of the man it was built for, Coleman Ash. Silas sat down on his shop stool with the letters and the will open under the lamp, and understood that the broke-down coffin the town had laughed at for a month was a rare early cabinet office secretary by a great forgotten maker, built to order for a bank president who died before it ever shipped, worth a small fortune to anyone who knew that name, and worth far more than money as the keeper of a dead man's last will and the letters no one had ever been meant to lose. The next morning Silas did not call a salvage barn, and did not strip the desk of its brass and its burl, and did not gut the carcass into one of those rustic, reclaimed wood liquor cabinets or a rough sideboard for his own kitchen. And a few in town thought him a fool a second time. He let them. He had spent one whole month being the man who paid $40 for a broke-down coffin, and he did not mind being thought a fool by people who had never once been right about the thing in front of them. He carried the maker's mark and the will and the letters first to a museum of American furniture and to a probate lawyer who knew what an unproved 50-year-old will meant, and set himself to the harder thing, to cut a forgotten maker's name and a dead man's last wishes back into the record that had dropped them, and to find what family Coleman Ash had left. The curator went very still over the maker's mark and the finished joinery, and said quietly that a documented cabinet office secretary by that maker, built to a named commission and with the maker's own die-struck order in the knee-hole, was the kind of thing a museum waits a lifetime for, and had all but given up as gone, and that the man who built it had been no failed country joiner at all, but exactly the kind of overlooked master the record is supposed to keep, and had simply lost. And Coleman Ash had descendants in the country still, a great-grandson 2 counties over among them, a gray man who had grown up on a scrap of family talk that some old great-grandfather had died with his affairs in a mess and the family cut out of it, a story the family told as an old grievance and mostly let go. Silas went to him that fall with the letters and the proved copy of the will, the maker's mark photographed plain on the burl and the die-struck order in the knee-hole, and watched a gray man read his own great-grandfather's hand across 50 years, the last wishes he had sealed and trusted to a desk that never arrived. He put a hand flat on the table and went quiet. They had grown up thinking their old man careless and their inheritance simply lost. The will and the letters told them instead that he had set his house in order with great care, entrusted it for safe carriage, and been failed only by his own early death and a maker's undelivered desk. The man asked why he had troubled to come so far to give a dead stranger's family back their grandfather's last words. Silas said only that a maker hides a man's will behind a false back and cuts his own name into the burl where nobody will ever look, because he needs to believe that someday somebody will come who can find it, so that being forgotten can never be the same as never having built the thing or written the words at all, and that he had nobody of his own to leave a thing to. So he had brought the dead man's letters and the old maker's name home to the people they were always meant for. There was one thing more Silas did before the desk left his shop, and he did it for the maker and for no one else. He restored it the slow, careful way over a season of nights, freed the swollen drawers and eased every runner, drew the racked carcass back into square, cleaned and waxed the burl until the figure came up warm and deep, rehung the great wings until they swung true and folded shut with a soft, sure knock of a vault, closing the way they had the day the maker set them, not to make a show of it, but because a desk a great maker had poured his life into deserved to do the one quiet thing it was made to do. He did not strip it for its brass and its burl, and did not gut the carcass into a liquor cabinet or a kitchen piece, because using a rare maker's office secretary for salvage or a novelty was the very thing that had nearly killed it. And there was no truth in it. The truth was the desk itself, the name cut into its burl, and the false back that had kept a dead man's words safe 50 years. So on the last night, with the museum's people coming in the morning, Silas set the empty desk open under the work lamp, pressed the little slip hitch, and let the false panel swing free one last time on its hidden pin, sound and dry and ready, the way the maker had built it to keep a thing safe against the years, and then folded the two great wings shut until they met true and the whole cabinet stood square and closed, breathing faint walnut and old wax to the rafters. He had not stripped it or made a novelty of it. That part was never the point. He had made it whole again so that the man who built it and the man whose last words it had kept would be seen one time by somebody who finally understood what they were. That fall the desk went where it belonged, into a museum of American furniture, with the maker's name read clear at last and his rare commission named beside it in the record. And the will was proved, and the letters carried home generations late, so the family that had thought their old man careless knew at last that he had set his house in order, and only death had kept the words from them. Word of it went around the town the same as the laughter had, only quieter, and the people who had called Silas a fool let the name the old man's broke-down coffin drop and did not pick it up again. Dorset Vane was not run out of business and was not made a villain. He was simply a man who had laughed loud at a thing he never bothered to look inside. And the next time he held court by the auction table, the others did not lean in so far. Being right was the whole of what Silas had wanted, and it had brought a great forgotten maker's name and a dead man's last words back up out of the dust. The museum kept the desk where the town could see it. They set the towering wing-fold secretary in the middle of the front hall under a soft light. The walnut waxed and the burl glowing deep, the wings swinging true, and the false back left open behind glass so a card could show how it had kept its cash, the rare office secretary of a great forgotten maker, built for a bank president who never lived to sit at it, restored to the maker's name at last. A card told whoever came through that this desk had been the finest work of a self-taught American maker the world let disappear, shoved against a barn wall and marked for firewood, whole again only because one man troubled to open the thing they laughed at. And on a still evening, that next spring, the light going gold through the tall front windows, Silas Wren drove over to look in on it. And there in the last of the sun stood the desk, whole and freed and seen at last, the burl glowing warm where a stranger's hands had finally reached it. Silas was 73 years old, a man the auction had laughed at one whole month, and he stood quiet a long moment and laid one broad-scarred hand flat on the cool walnut of the closed wing beside the maker's cut name and nodded once. The way a man nods at a job that was done right. The work had said it for him, the way work always did. A maker hides a man's last words behind a false back and cuts his own name into the burl where nobody will ever look, and trusts that somebody will come who can find what his hands made and kept, so that being forgotten for a lifetime can never be the same as never having built the thing at all, and a town rarely knows what greatness or whose last words were left to rot at its own fence line until somebody troubles to open the thing they laughed at. So I'll leave it to you. Was Silas Wren right to give the desk to a museum under the maker's name and carry a dead man's letters home to strangers without keeping any of it for himself? Or was that one decency too far, in a world that had laughed at him for nothing? Tell me which one in the comments, and I'll read them.